Hi, I'm Eric Maddox, and I am very excited today to talk to you about my story about tracking down Saddam Hussein. But more importantly, I want to talk to you about how did it happen? How did I get these prisoners on a battlefield to give me full cooperation? I want to talk about earning and gaining trust in communication. In 2003, when the United States went to war in Iraq, I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army, and I was a trained interrogator. But I had never actually conducted a live interrogation before. See, along with being a trained interrogator, the United States military had also taught me Chinese Mandarin. And for years, the Army had decided that I was much more valuable as a Chinese Mandarin linguist than I would ever be as an interrogator. So in 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, I was stationed in Los Angeles, California. I was responsible for conducting interviews of any Chinese citizens who attempted to illegally enter the United States through our ports. But I was told that my work as a Chinese intelligence collection officer was so valuable that I would never, ever be sent to the Middle East. So you can imagine the shock I felt when 3 months into the war in Iraq, my commander hands me highly unexpected, highly top secret orders for Baghdad. And he said, "Eric, you're the only person from our unit who received orders. And they're top secret. They don't even actually say what unit you're going to. Oh, and you're leaving in 10 days. I accepted the orders. 10 days later, they put me on a military aircraft for the Baghdad International Airport. And when I get there, I am picked up by a team of soldiers. But they're all wearing civilian clothes. And they had full beards. And they didn't say anything to me. And they took me to this building with no windows, and they brought me into this room, and they sat me down, and across this table, one of the bearded soldiers looks at me, and he said, "Are you familiar with JSOC?" I said, I don't know what that is. Is that a word? And they said, "JSOC, it's the Joint Special Operations Command." I said, "Man, that sounds really cool. I don't know what that is." They said, "Joint Special Operations Command. That's the United States military task force responsible for tracking down the most wanted people in the world." They said, ever since we invaded Iraq, the most wanted man in the world is Saddam Hussein. He's the ace of spades. And I don't know if y'all remember, back in 2003, the Department of Defense, they created that deck of playing cards. And it was Saddam and all of his senior regime members. One of the bearded soldiers said, "Joint Special Operations Command, our exclusive mission in this war is to track down and kill or capture every single person on the deck of cards, mainly Saddam." And I'm sitting there, obviously in shock. And I just said, "That's awesome. I had no idea if you guys actually existed. And now I do. What do you want with me? I'm a Chinese Mandarin linguist." One of the bearded soldiers said, "You're a trained interrogator." I said, "Y'all know I've never done an interrogation before in my entire life. What am I doing here?" The bearded soldier said, "You're former infantry. You're a paratrooper. You're a graduate of Ranger School." And they were right. See, when I first enlisted in the Army back in 1994, I enlisted as an infantry grunt. And I spent 3 years as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. And while I was there, I went and I graduated the Army's Ranger School. And it was years later, they taught me Chinese Mandarin and trained me as an interrogator. One of the bearded soldiers said, "Eric, we are the interrogators for the Joint Special Operations Command. Joint JSOC, we have Delta Force teams all through Baghdad every night looking for Saddam." He said, "Eric, they're flooding us with prisoners." He said, "But we also have Delta Force teams out there, out in the Badlands, and they keep calling us interrogators, and they want us to go out there with them on their missions, on their raids." He said, "Eric, we're interrogators. We're not infantry. So we called the army, the big army. We said, all right, give us a list of every single army interrogator who's former infantry and a graduate of Ranger School. They said, Eric, you were the only name on the list. They said, welcome to Baghdad. I was there 3 days before they put me on a helicopter, sent me to Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit. I'm picked up by the Delta Force team there. And the Delta Force commander, he said, Eric, we've never fought a war like this before. We don't know who the enemy are. And none of these prisoners are talking. He said, Eric, there's no uniform. There's no chain of command. There's no enemy, government, military. He said, every day we drive through the streets of Saddam's little bitty hometown of Tikrit, right in the middle of the Sunni Triangle. And the people wave and tell us how much they love us. But at night, they're blowing up our soldiers. And we have no idea who they are. He said, the United States Army, here in this town of Tikrit, they have a prison full of hundreds of detainees. He said, Eric, you're going to live with us. Every day, I want you to go down to that prison, get a couple of prisoners, bring them back to this house. This Delta Force team, they had their own little house on the U.S. compound there in Tikrit. And my Delta Force commander said, Eric, we're going to give you your own room. You can do the interrogations. We'll give you your own linguist for all the translations. He said, I want you to interrogate every single prisoner in Tikrit and figure out who the bad guys are in the Sunni Triangle. To me, that mission was very clear. I'd never done interrogations before, but I had received the best interrogation training in the world. The United States Army taught me what they thought they knew about interrogations. And I will tell you, United States Army, they did not teach torture, but the techniques that I was trained on were very zero-sum game. They taught that when you sit down with this prisoner, with conviction and authority, you must make them believe you know everything about them. And under no circumstances, because they talk their ways out of the trouble that they're in. And they taught us, they're going to try to lie to you. Whatever you do, don't listen to those lies. And I brought in, the next day I got a couple of prisoners. I brought the first one in and I sat him down and I began my very first interrogation. And I realized very quickly, this is not going to work. This is not a soldier off a battlefield. This is some guy who has a job during the day and supposedly he was attacking us at night. We have no evidence. He's not going to break. He's not going to cooperate. I interrogated him for about an hour and he shut down on me. I put him aside. I brought in the next prisoner. And I did the same thing. And I knew then these techniques will not work in this war. I did not know how to get these prisoners to cooperate. But I told myself, I've got to figure out who these people are. I don't even know what it means to be Iraqi. I don't know what it means to live under the wrath of Saddam Hussein, Sunnis and Shias and Sunni triangles. And the next day, I brought in a prisoner. And I told myself, see how long you can keep him talking. Just talking to you. And I sat him down and I asked the standard questions, the things that you think about of how you would talk to somebody. Ask them about their friends and their family and their jobs and life. And the prisoner would answer my questions. But he didn't trust me. He certainly wasn't opening up to me. And the more that I sat with this prisoner, the more I started to realize he wants to be transparent, but he can't. And it wasn't the questions that I was asking him. It was the way he was perceiving me. Because it was the way I was behaving because of my mindset. And I realized if I could put my goals of getting a confession out of this prisoner, my agenda to gather useful intelligence for my commander, my biases of seeing this person as the enemy, this prisoner would start to actually open up a little bit. He didn't confess, he didn't provide intel, but he would be more transparent in our conversations. And day after day, as I'm talking to these prisoners, I started to realize, oh my goodness, it comes down to putting all my distractions, all my perceptions of this individual as the enemy, if I can put those behind me, these prisoners really want to have in-depth discussions. And the more and more that I talk to these prisoners, I realize it is all about me. And if I can put myself completely in the shoes of these prisoners, they're dying to talk to me. They're dying to find someone they can actually trust. And the prisoners started talking to me about what they knew about the insurgency and who they believed the enemy were. And the more and more that I'm talking to these prisoners, I started to realize they actually want to help, but I've got to help them first. And the more that I connected to these prisoners, I finally had them want to give up targets, actual locations where we could find the enemy. And they were giving me targets. I went to my Delta Force commander. His name is Bam Bam. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, you wanted to find out who the bad guys are in the Sunni Triangle. I said, Bam Bam, we know now who they are. These prisoners want to take us. They want to take you on those locations. And he said, Eric, that's just not what we do. He said, I can't call headquarters and tell them I'm going to put a Delta Force team, the best the United States military has, on a target based on information from the enemy. And I said, Bam Bam, I've built a level of trust with these prisoners I didn't think could exist. I'm telling you, they want and they're dying to help us. He said, all right, I'll go on a couple of targets. He says, you get a couple of targets from these prisoners that you feel very confident the bad guy's going to be there. And I gave him a couple. And the next night, the team, they went and they raided those locations. And we finally captured someone we knew we were actually looking for. And as we brought back those two prisoners, Bam Bam, I said, come watch this interrogation. Watch how this goes down. And it went from zero trust, and I just listened. I put myself in the shoes of this prisoner, and we start to connect, and this prisoner is dying to help us, and he starts giving locations. And Bam Bam straight up is like, okay, here's what we're going to do. He goes, when you start gaining the trust of prisoners like this, he goes, Eric, you can't just go put them back in the system. He goes, they're going to get sent to Abu Ghraib, the big prison. They'll never be seen by their family. Will never see him again. He goes, they're going to live with us. Do not take them to the prison. We built this room for them, right? Like, prisoners weren't walking around making breakfast, but they were living in this one room. We took great care of it, and they kind of turned into my board of advisors. And over the next 5 months, we went through 300 prisoners. And as we gained the trust of these key prisoners, they started to open up the vastness of this insurgency in the Sunni Triangle. We created a link diagram that had over 2,000 names on it. And then they started to explain this thing's all connected. It's got regions and teams and regional commanders. And at the very top, the entire insurgency in this war in the Sunni Triangle was one man. He was a former inner circle bodyguard of Saddam Hussein. His name was Mohammed Ibrahim. Saddam Hussein had hundreds of bodyguards. But for some reason, this one man, Mohammed Ibrahim, was running this entire insurgency. And as my tour's running down, I'm on a 6-month deployment. As I'm down under 2 weeks, the prisoners finally opened up and they actually started to do the analysis themselves, not just what they knew for certain, but they started to work to discover, where is this? Where is it going? And my smartest, most trusted prisoners told me, they said, Mohammed Ibrahim has got to be with Saddam. He does not have this level of authority. He's not this intelligent. This thing is so sophisticated. He's got to be with Saddam. And I went and told Bam Bam, I said, we're actually going after Saddam Hussein. And Bam Bam said, Saddam Hussein is not in this town of Tikrit. He said, Eric, I had to beg and plead to get a single interrogator up here. And you know why they let me keep you? I said, well, I thought you just didn't send me back. He goes, they let me keep you here because you're a Chinese Mandarin linguist who had never been to war before. You just didn't matter that much. Nobody thinks Saddam's here. And I said, Bam Bam, I'm telling you, Saddam Hussein's in Tikrit. He said, well, you got about 10 days before they send you back to Baghdad. He goes, if that's the case, we've got to get him now. The prisoners have got to take us. I said, all right, Bam Bam, you know we're going after Mohammed Ibrahim. He's the bodyguard. Bam was like, yeah, get me the guy. I said, the way these prisoners work, that's the chain of command of the insurgency. I said, we need to go after Muhammad Ibrahim's inner circle, his business partners, his money, his friends, his nephews, his relatives. And Bam Bam looks at me and he said, for the next 10 days, that's all we're doing. You get me that bodyguard. And that's what we did. We started going after the friends and the relatives and business partners. And as we captured them, I connected and they broke and they're living with us. They actually were running the room. They were the leaders of the board. And with 4 days left on my tour, we captured the driver of this bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim. And the driver was the man. And he sat in front of me and it took me 6 hours, but then we connected. And the driver looks at me and he said, Eric, I drive that bodyguard everywhere in the Sunni Triangle. He goes, and I deliver millions of dollars every single week. I deliver that money and I deliver the orders for every single attack since this war began. And I'm like, where's Muhammad Ibrahim? He said, Eric, I'm taking all orders from Muhammad Ibrahim, my boss. He said, he's taking all orders from Saddam Hussein. The driver said, I drive Muhammad Ibrahim almost everywhere except to go see Saddam. I said, where's Saddam? The driver said, I don't know. Only Muhammad Ibrahim actually knows Saddam Hussein's location, but he's somewhere around Tikrit. I told the driver, I said, you got to take me to Muhammad Ibrahim, the bodyguard. And the driver looks at me and he said, every single night, I drop that bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim, my boss, off of one of 5 locations in Tikrit. These are safe houses. He will be at one of those 5 safe houses tonight. And I went and told Bam Bam the whole story, and Bam Bam said, you leave in 3 nights. He goes, I'm hitting all 5 of those safe houses tonight. We got to get that bodyguard. And that night, Bam Bam and the team raided all 5 of the safe houses. I knew he had to be at one of them. But the bodyguard was not at any of them. And Bam Bam brings it back all the prisoners. And what used to take me days and hours, I could gain the trust of these prisoners in minutes. Because I understood it's not about rapport. It's not about building a friendship. It's about immediately demonstrating to an individual, I'm seeking to understand you. I'm listening at a higher level than you've ever been listened to your entire life. And I knew, and I now know, and what I was learning at that time was this is what people want. This is the essence of trust. And instantaneously, these prisoners said, yep, Eric, I was running a safe house for the bodyguard. And another prisoner said, listen, Eric, you scared him out of this town of Tikrit. You guys were getting too close. He went to the town of Samara. And another prisoner said, listen, Eric, in Samara, Muhammad Ibrahim has a regional commander. I know where his house is. Muhammad Ibrahim will be at that house. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, those were 5 good raids. Those safe houses. I said, we've actually pushed him to this town of Samara. I said, I need one more raid. I promise he'll be there. And Bam Bam said, you got 2 nights. We're going tonight. We're going to hit that house. And we went and we raided that sub-commander, that regional commander's location in Samara. I knew we'd find our bodyguard. And the bodyguard wasn't there. Sub-commander wasn't there. But the sub-commander's little brother was. It's this 25-year-old kid. Bam Bam brought him back to me. And in 20 minutes, that sub-commander's little brother broke. He said, Eric, Muhammad Ibrahim doesn't come to my brother's house. He said, Muhammad Ibrahim, yeah, you scared him to this town of Samara. He rented a house 1 block from where you just captured me. He's at that house right now. And I went to Bam Bam and I said, all right, one more raid, man. I'm telling you, I know exactly where he is now. He's 1 block away from you guys where you got to go get him. And Bam Bam said, all right, we're going. He goes, you literally are leaving tomorrow night. So they go back and they raided the rental house, the place we knew we'd find our bodyguard. Muhammad Ibrahim was not there. But Muhammad Ibrahim's 20-year-old son was. It was a good hit. They brought me back the 20-year-old boy. As soon as I talked to him, we connected. And he looks at me and he said, Eric, My dad, Muhammad Ibrahim, was at the house. You just captured me 2 hours before you came. He said, how would I know where he went? And I'm looking at all these prisoners living in our house, my board of directors. And I'm thinking, how would any of them know where Muhammad Ibrahim is now? And I told myself, you listen to this boy. You connect with him. You talk to him. He'll give you something. Don't force it. Just listen to him. And I brought Muhammad Ibrahim's son in and I started talking to him. And I mean, we connected. We really connected. Because this went from what you would describe as an interrogation to more of a family counseling session. Because apparently Muhammad Ibrahim and his 20-year-old son relationship was not going so well. And the 20-year-old starts crying and telling me that his dad does not respect him as a man. And he's really sobbing. And he starts telling me, I wish my dad and I would do things like we would do when I was a boy. And I'm like, your dad's kind of in the middle of a war right now. You might want to cut him some slack. And the boy says, no. I just wish he would take me fishing. And I said, your dad still goes fishing? He said, yeah. They go fishing, but he doesn't take me anymore. And I said, where do they go fishing? And the boy said, well, they fish along the Tigris River. I said, where? He said, well, they just built this pond. They fish next to the pond along the Tigris River. And when the boy told me they built a pond, I remembered one of the early interrogations I did when we got to Tikrit. We captured Saddam Hussein's cook. And he's a cook, right? He didn't care. He's wide open. And the cook says, Eric, being the president, that's what they called Saddam. He said, when you're the cook of the president, it's pretty much the easiest job in the world. Saddam just likes this one dish. It's a fish dish called mazgoof. Chef said, I make the best mazgoof in the world. I'm Saddam Hussein's cook. And when the boy said they just built a fish pond, why would you build a fish pond during the middle of a war unless you needed to stock the pond for your brutal dictator boss because you couldn't go to the market and get fish because the United States had occupied your country? And I went to Bam Bam and I explained the whole story. I said, man, we got one more raid. I need you to raid that fish pond. And Bam Bam's like, you're leaving tonight. And on your last night, we're going to raid a fish pond? I said, Bam Bam, that bodyguard's going to be there. And that night, Bam Bam and the team went out along the Tigris River outside of Samara and raided a fish pond. And they built this shack. And when Bam Bam and the team went in, he calls in. He said, Eric, we got 2 people. And then 20 minutes later, he calls and he said, it's nobody. He said, Eric, it's not the bodyguard. It's not Saddam. He goes, we got 2 fishermen here. He said, your flight is leaving. Get to the tarmac. Get all the prisoners from the house. I'll meet you there. And Bam Bam and the team, they grab these 2 fishermen. He races to the tarmac, my helicopter, and I board up all these prisoners who have been living with us for all these weeks. And he gives the fisherman, and he looks at me and he said, you do not quit. He said, Eric, it's going to be a couple of days before they send you to Baghdad. He goes, you interrogate him. He said, get me one more target. And I went to Baghdad. And I see all the bearded soldiers that I hadn't seen in months. And they're like, all right, tomorrow we're going to send all your prisoners to Abu Ghraib. But I had that one night. And that night I brought in the 2 fishermen. And I went back and forth. And it took me 11 hours. But after 11 hours, one of the fishermen finally breaks. And he looks at me and he said, Eric, I work for Muhammad Ibrahim. He said, he's my distant cousin. He said, I catch fish out of the river. I put it in the pond. Every couple of days, him and his buddies come and they grab fish out of the pond and they leave. I said, where did he go? And the fisherman looks at me and he said, Eric, a couple of days ago, Muhammad Ibrahim came to me and he got the address of our mutual aunt and uncle in Baghdad. He said, you guys scared him out of Samara. I think he's at my aunt and uncle's house in Baghdad. And I'm thinking, that's awesome. We're in Baghdad. So I got the sketch and the map, and they tell me my flight to leave the country is going to be in 3 days. December 13th at 8 o'clock in the morning, 2003, my flight is leaving the country. And I called the Bam Bam of Baghdad, right? The Delta commander in Baghdad. And I explained the story. I said, I need you to go on this raid. He said, yeah, I'll put it on the list. I said, sir, what does that mean? He said, Eric, nobody thinks Saddam Hussein is in Tikrit. We've gone through every single house. You guys have never found anyone up there on the deck of cards. You're going after bodyguards. You got prisoners living in the house. You haven't gone on a single raid that hadn't come from the enemy. Nobody thinks he's up there, but I'll put it on the list. And that's all I heard. And my flight's to leave in 3 days, and the days came and went. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, December 13th, 2003, the Bam Bam of Baghdad calls back into the prison, and he said, Eric, we had a slow night. We went on your raid. He said, we didn't find anything. We found 4 guys at the house if you want us to bring them. And I said, yeah, bring them in. We'll figure out what went wrong. And they brought in the 4 prisoners, and they were handcuffed, sitting on the ground with hoods over their head. And the commander says, yeah, that guy over there owns the house. And I brought in the homeowner, and I sat him down, and it was 5 o'clock in the morning. I had 3 hours before my flight left, and I told myself, don't rush it. Just listen to him. He's going to give you something. And as soon as I started talking to the guy that owned the home, I realized, this guy's not from Baghdad. This guy's from Tikrit. What was he doing at this house? And it took me another hour, and I'm like, oh my goodness. This is the deputy under my bodyguard, Muhammad Ibrahim. We had that 2,000 person link diagram. This is the number 2 guy. And by 6 o'clock in the morning, the deputy breaks. And he said, I'm the deputy of Muhammad Ibrahim. And I said, I need you to take me to him. I was thinking to myself, if you can do it in the next 15 minutes, that would be great. And the deputy looks at me and he said, Eric, when your soldiers came to that house and captured me last night, he said, Muhammad Ibrahim was sleeping in the bed next to me. And I thought, this is Delta Force. They don't miss anybody. Like, did they get my guy last night and they didn't know it? And I went to the guards. I said, bring me any prisoners from any raid last night. And they just brought those 3 individuals in. They sat them on the ground, hoods over their head, handcuffs behind their back. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, is one of these guys going to be Muhammad Ibrahim? I had never seen, we didn't have a picture of Muhammad Ibrahim. But I knew exactly what my bodyguard was supposed to look like. My bodyguard was supposed to have a chin, like the actor John Travolta. You know, the chin. And I start lifting up the hoods. And on the last hood, I started lifting it before I even got the hood off. I saw that chin. And I knew it was him. And I took off his hood and I said, you're Muhammad Ibrahim. Man, I've been waiting to meet you. And in perfect English, he looks at me and he said, you're the interrogator from Tikrit. I've been waiting to meet you too. It's after 6 o'clock. My flight leaves at 8 o'clock in the morning. Under no circumstances were they going to let me, a staff sergeant, former Chinese Mandarin linguist who had wasted his entire 6 months interrogating prisoners in Tikrit, stay. I had to get this man to break in 2 hours. The one man I believed Saddam trusted to never, ever give up his location. I brought him into the room. I sat him down and I told myself, do not rush this. I do not know where he's going to go. I do not know what he needs, but he will tell you if you'll listen to him. And I sat him down. I took out the hood and I said, there's only one thing we can talk about. And that's the exact location of Saddam Hussein. And I didn't know what was going to come out of his mouth, but I knew whatever he said first would tell me. And he looks at me and he said, you give me way too much credit. He said, the president? I have no idea where that guy is. And I knew immediately. And I looked at him and I said, well, I didn't give you any credit. I did not know who you were before I came to this country. I said, the 300 prisoners that I've interrogated in Tikrit, the 40 of your family members that he forced you to get involved in this insurgency, who I have in this prison right now, they give you credit. They give you credit for ruining their lives. And he looks at me and he just goes, but he wasn't rolling his eyes at me. He was rolling his eyes at Saddam. He blamed Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein had hundreds of bodyguards. Why? Why did he pick this one man? Saddam's bodyguards, they were some of the most powerful people in the country. They tried to carry the power of Saddam. You didn't mess with them. They were like mafia thugs. And they took the power that they had by working directly under Saddam Hussein, and they used it to their benefit throughout the Sunni Triangle. So many people in the Sunni Triangle hated those bodyguards, but not Muhammad Ibrahim. Muhammad Ibrahim was the nicest inner circle bodyguard you ever met. He was a fun-loving, whiskey-drinking, domino-playing bodyguard. He did not have an enemy in the world. And people in the United States military did not think Saddam Hussein, the ace of spades, was in Tikrit. Why? Because we didn't find a single person on the deck of cards the entire time I was in Tikrit. Because Saddam, as sick of a man as he is, he was a genius. And he knew everybody on the deck of cards, they're a lightning rod. They will bring in U.S. forces. They'll attract attention. He made them all leave, and he created a new regime being run by Muhammad Ibrahim, a man that had his unwavering loyalty, but a man who didn't have an enemy in the world. So Saddam knew none of the locals were going to turn in this Muhammad Ibrahim. He could function and run this entire insurgency without any retribution from his past actions. It was a brilliant move, but Muhammad Ibrahim blamed Saddam. And I'd been waiting on this one piece of information. And as Muhammad Ibrahim sitting there rolling his eye, I looked at him and I said, Your wife had a baby 3 months ago. He didn't know I knew anything about his wife and a baby. I said, your wife and that baby have been at this house, and I gave him the house, in Tikrit, ever since the day that baby was born. And he was shocked. I said, I never sent soldiers to that house. I never sent soldiers to find your spouse. Where else would you go to find someone that asked their spouse? But I never sent the soldiers because I never hurt that baby. I would never put that baby's life in danger. I said, what will he do for you now? What will he do for that baby now? At this point, he's whelping. And he's crying, and literally it's 7:45. And on cue, the interrogators come in. They're like, what are you still doing here? You got to go catch your flight. And I told him, I said, I got to have it now. And he said, I don't know if I should do it. He said, I don't know if I should do it. He didn't say he couldn't do it. He said, I don't know if I should do it. And I'm thinking to myself, ooh, I think he should. I really, really do. And he said, I can't. I said, I'm leaving. They are pulling me out of here. This is not a joke. Me, the interrogator from Tikrit, you and me, we're the only two that think he's up there. I said, when I leave, no one's going to help you. I need it now. He said, I can't. And I'm taking him to his cell. And I said, I know how this story's going to end. You're going to change your mind. And when you do, I will be gone. I need it now. And he said, I got to think. And I said, okay, you're going to be in here. I'm gone. I'm never going to see you again. When you change your mind, make them come talk to you. Make them come listen to you. When you're going to give up the exact location, you're going to take us to Saddam, make somebody come talk to you. I'm gone. And I put him in his cell and I left. And I went and packed my bags. And a few minutes later, they picked me up. They're driving me across the tarmac. I'm leaving the country. And as we're going, the senior interrogator asked me, he said, what did you do to your prisoner? I said, I didn't do anything to him. Why? And he said, the guards are freaking out. They think he's trying to kill himself. They said he won't stop yelling and screaming, and he's banging his head against the wall of his cell. I knew he broke. And I said, just hold the plane. And I jumped out of the truck. I ran across the tarmac. I went to the prison. I grabbed Mohammed Ibrahim out. I brought him to the interrogation room. I lifted off his hood. And I said, where is he? And he looks at me and he said, Eric, we got to go. But we got to go right now. I said, where are we going? He said, we're going back to Tikrit. He goes, Saddam Hussein is in this village called Adwar. He's at the farmhouse of a man named Qais Namek Jassim. He said, but we got to go. And I got a sketch and the map. And he said, he's there. Eric, we got to go. And by this time, the interrogators were back to pick me up. And I went outside. And I said, my man just broke. He's going to take us to Saddam. And they looked at me and they said, man, go get on the plane. I said, you don't understand. This guy's going to take us to Saddam. He's in Adwar. He's just south of Tikrit. And the senior interrogator looked at me and he said, Eric, Saddam Hussein's not Tikrit. We don't know where he is, but we know he's not up there. Now go get on the daggum plane. And I gave him the sketch and the map, and I said, please call Bam Bam. Tell him Mohammed Ibrahim's dying to take him to the Ace of Spades. And I gave the information, and I left. They put me on that truck. They took me to my flight, and I left the country. And when you're with this task force, you don't just go back home. You have to go to Doha, Qatar. You got to give a top secret out briefing. And so the next morning, I show up to another building, no windows, top secret, and I'm going to be my out briefing of my 6 months into Crete. And they knock on the door, and a senior officer opens it, he looks out, and he just said, all briefings today are canceled. Clunk. And we're standing there, and the sergeant knocks on the door, and the senior officer opens up, and the sergeant said, Staff Sergeant Maddox can't leave the country until he gives his briefing. And the senior officer looks at me, and he pulls me inside, and he said, you're Eric Maddox? I said, yes. He said, Eric, briefings are canceled because we got him. We got him last night. Your prisoner did it. And I said, how'd it go down? He said, when you left, we called Bam Bam. And Bam Bam and that entire Delta Force team got on a helicopter, flew to Baghdad, picked up Mohammed Ibrahim, went back to the house where I'd spent all those months and planned and executed the raid of the farmhouse of Qais Namek Jassim. And they could not find Saddam. Bam Bam and the team looked for an hour, and after an hour, Bam Bam went to the prisoner, Mohammed Ibrahim, pulls him out of the truck, cuts off his handcuffs, lifts off his hood, and he said, where is he? Mohammed Ibrahim grabs Bam Bam by the hand, escorts him and the team around the backside of the house. Mohammed Ibrahim will not say anything. He's totally silent. Walks him around the side of the house, turns to him, stares at him, and starts digging with his feet. He's digging his feet, and they realize this guy's digging up a rope. And they moved him aside, and they started digging. They realized this rope was connected to a lid. And they cleared it out, and they're about to lift it up, and they all have their weapons drawn. And they looked at Mohammed Ibrahim, and he's standing there going. And they pulled it open, and they are staring at him. Saddam Hussein, he was pinpointed by the one man he trusted to never ever give up his location. And that man broke in less than 2 hours. Because he was listened to at a higher level than he had ever been listened to in his entire life. I still was not allowed to go home. I was sent immediately to Washington, D.C., to the Pentagon, to the office of then Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. I briefed Secretary Rumsfeld on the capture of Saddam. Secretary Rumsfeld loved it. He loved everything about it. But most importantly, he loved the interrogations. And he looks at all these admirals and generals who are in the room, and he said, I want Staff Sergeant Maddox to be my interrogator. And they said, Mr. Secretary, we borrow interrogators from the Army and the Marine Corps. Staff Sergeant Maddox is actually a Chinese Mandarin linguist. He's got to go back to Los Angeles. And Secretary Rumsfeld said, I know, I'm sick of borrowing linguists in L.A. to be interrogators in Iraq. He said, I want my own team. And Staff Sergeant Maddox will be my first one. So by the time I did get back to Los Angeles, California, I had an email from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Secretary Rumsfeld had gotten the approval for the funding to have a civilian interrogation team, a 30-person team that would fall directly under the Department of Defense within the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I was being offered the first position. I don't know if I had a choice of whether or not I took that job, but I took it. And my very first assignment, they sent me all over the country, all over the world. And I taught this interrogation technique to other interrogators, other service members. But I didn't know what the technique was. I didn't know how to teach it. I didn't really understand it. And I would brief it and I said, I really just helped these prisoners and I let a lot of them go. They were living with us in a house. And you can imagine the reception that got from these military commanders. They were like, boy, Staff Sergeant Maddox, we're so proud of you. We're never going to do that. But my next assignment is I was sent back out to the battlefield, back out with the Joint Special Operations Command. But this time I had my own team of interrogators. 6 of those 30 interrogators were going to work directly under me. And I told them, I said, I have to watch you do interrogations. I said, I've never actually seen anybody else do interrogations. And these interrogators, they interrogated using the Army's old techniques, the zero-sum game. And the prisoners just don't break. I'm going to give you a statistic. I'm going to give you several statistics, but I'm going to start with this. When I told you those interrogation techniques that I was trained on wouldn't work, they didn't work at all. Since 9/11 until now, the thousands of interrogations the United States military has conducted using the old techniques, prisoners break at 4%. 4%. Like, that's not success in any standard. I told him, I said, you're not listening to these prisoners. And the interrogator said, Eric, we hear the same thing you hear. And I said, you may hear it, but you're not listening to them. I said, watch. And I interrogated those same prisoners and they broke. And they said, Eric, you're just being nice to them. I said, no. And I said, we're going side by side. And side by side, we did these interrogations. And I realized they literally are hearing a different conversation than I'm hearing. And it comes down to this. Over the next 6 months, we did hundreds of interrogations, thousands of hours together. People have a listening problem. On average, people only listen to 25% of what they hear. Why is that? It's because the way our brains work. Do you know we can hear 5 times faster than an average person can talk? So what do we do with that capacity? Well, because we're naturally selfish and self-centered, we fill that capacity with anything we want because we're so bored out of our mind because mentally, during a conversation, it sounds like the talker's talking this slow. And we get bored out of our mind. And we fill that capacity with things that matter to us. The problem is, do you know the human beings cannot actually multitask? And so what happens is when we think that we have this capacity, it actually becomes priority over listening to someone, and it reduces our listening to 25%. So when I told these interrogators, I said, wait a second, I've got to figure out what is distracting you, what is getting in your mind. As a team, over the next 6 months, going through hundreds of interrogations, we identified the 6 categories of listening distractions. These 6 categories that lower our listening. It's categories 1 through 6. Category 1 being the least significant, meaning this lowers your listening the least. Category 6 being the most significant. It lowers your listening the most. Category 1, immediate, non-biased distractions. What does that mean? Anything in your immediate presence. It doesn't have anything to do with the person that you're listening to. But if you're watching me on a computer screen, but behind me you have a TV on, just whatever's on that TV will lower your listening to me. If the temperature in the room is too hot and it's muggy and you're just not comfortable, it will lower, it doesn't have anything to do with me, but it will lower your ability to listen to me. If the shoes and clothes you're wearing just don't fit right, it'll lower your listening. Category 2, Personal, non-biased distractions. Non-biased doesn't have anything to do with the person you're listening to, but they're personal issues going on in your world that are so significant, it's going to lower your listening. If you, after this presentation, you've got a meeting with your supervisor and you know it's super important, or with other individuals and you're really worried about the meeting, you're not focused on the individual that you're supposed to be talking to. If your cell phone's blowing up and you have text and something on there so significant, it literally will detract from your ability to listen to a conversation. Category 3, super interesting. Terms, nomenclatures, acronyms, statements from an industry that you're not familiar with. I'm a military interrogator. If I told this story, most of you all understand jargon, military jargon, police force jargon, law enforcement. But if I'm talking to a group of business individuals and I'm talking about MOSs and AITs and 97 Echoes and 11 Bravos, they'll just buzz, they'll flatline. Because if somebody uses you hear a single term that you're not familiar with, wherever you are listening, let's say you're having a great day and you're listening at 30%, a single term will cut your listening in half. Category 4, 5, and 6 is where we make all of our money. This is where we lose most of our listening. Category 4, biases towards the individual you're listening to. You can imagine the bias, the preconceived thought of an interrogator listening to a prisoner on a battlefield, or vice versa. Your idea of your notion of how this individual sees the world in law enforcement right now. How many times do we have perceptions of how someone may see you? How often do you know because they're blatantly telling you? But those preconceived notions, those biases, it literally filters the statements and words that you may hear. It filtered to what you actually listen to. It drastically lowers your listening. Category 5, super important. Thinking about your agenda, your goals, your objectives in the conversation. When you're sitting there talking to someone, you're trying to communicate with them and you're trying to listen to them, but all you're thinking about is, I want to accomplish this, I want to say this, I want to prove this point, I want to make this level of influence. It subconsciously turns you away from the person that you're talking to. And most importantly, it drastically lowers your listening because you're not hearing to what they're talking about. You're thinking about your goals and objectives. Category 6, thinking about what you're about to say next in a conversation. How many times are we talking to someone and we're preparing our next statement? We want it to be impactful. We want it to be factually accurate. We want to counter their points. But as we're preparing what we're going to say, our listening collapses. And the problem is, when our listening collapses, it disconnects us from the person we're talking to. The purpose of listening at a high level is a single thing, and that is to build trust. What we realize is that we can identify these 6 categories of distractions. Going into conversations, during conversations, and we can put those behind us, we can increase our listening from the industry standard of 25% up to 50%. 50%, that's awesome, right? That's great. No. I told you, using the old Army techniques, prisoners broke only at 4%. I'm going to give you another statistic. Since 9/11 until now, I've done over 2,700 interrogations. I've done 8 deployments, and I've interrogated prisoners from 25 different countries. That team of 30 interrogators have done thousands. We break prisoners. We gain cooperation from prisoners at 65%. Compared to 4%, it's because we do this one thing. Yes, we remove our distractions. Yes, we get our listening, which will allow us to get it to 50%. But we get our listening deep into the 80s and 90s, and it's because we do this. We have a single agenda for our conversations. We seek to understand the perspective of the individual we're listening to with regards to that topic of conversation at that moment in time. We take all that capacity and we funnel into this single mission to listen to them, for them, to understand, not for how we want to understand it, but how they want us to perceive it. Why do we do that? Because we know this. Listening, the degree, the percentage to which you listen to someone is the exclusive measure to which somebody gives you immediate and current trust. Yes, you can go into conversations and have a past relationship. Yes, you can go into a conversation and someone knows your profession and maybe even have a negative perception or a positive perception. I support police officers. I support law enforcement. That gives you an established level of trust. Somebody can be completely opposite of that and say, I don't trust cops whatsoever, right? Wherever it is, the current level of trust is exclusively determined by a person understanding, determining to what level the person they're communicating is listening to them. If you listen above 75%, which is only possible by removing those categories of distractions and seeking to understand, it's the only way to get above 75%. The person realizes, and this magical thing occurs in their behavior, in their demeanor, in the way that they treat you, in the way they communicate you, because subconsciously they go, you actually care about me right now more than you do yourself. Do you see that? It's that connection we're all seeking in relationships. But most importantly, it's a level of trust that must be sought after. We've got to make this the level of trust that we're going to operate professionally in your industry. I understand the difficulty. I've had to sit across the table for people who are openly against me, who have openly discussed about killing people from my military, my country. But my job as a soldier was never and can never be to win over, above, against the enemy. It has to win them over to our side. We have to gain their trust. People talk about counterinsurgency war tactics. We didn't have any prior to 9/11. Now we have nearly 20 years. It's called COIN, C-O-I-N, counterinsurgency. Of course, we in the military love acronyms. It's COIN tactics, COIN strategy. It basically says, how do you fight successfully a war when there's no enemy soldiers, there's no government military on a battlefield, which are local civilians fighting against your military? The secret to COIN, the secret sauce, is that under no circumstances should the United States military expect or even attempt to kill, arrest, demoralize every enemy personnel. The goal of COIN is to communicate, to build trust with the civilians in the area to win over their trust. For the first decade after 9/11, our attempt to do that was writing checks to over 50 and even $100 billion between Iraq and Afghanistan to rebuild their infrastructure, pay for their jobs, build their weapons. And we realized, yes, they absolutely accepted the money. Yes, it may had an awkward boost to the economy in these war-torn countries, but it did not help us build any meaningful trust with not the enemy, with the local populace. The only way we were able to build trust was when we communicated with them. Not when we talked to them, not when we told them, but when we listened to them. Now, when you measure the amount of trust that we were able to achieve by communicating with the locals, less than 10% was with our commanders, our leaders, our politicians towards their leaders, their commanders, their politicians. Our soldiers didn't have the freedoms to just wander around towns and villages and talk to their people and get to know them. Over 90% of the trust, which allowed us to push this coin strategy, came from one tactic. United States military interrogators communicating with prisoners, communicating with their family members who came and sought to know, where's my husband, where's my brother, where's my person, and talking to these prisoners who said, yes, I joined ISIS, I joined Al-Qaeda, I joined the Taliban, but I want out. How do we do this? Eric, I want to take you to these places. Hey, interrogators who use empathy-based listening tactics, this is what I want to accomplish. And those seeds pushed outward. We talk about the difficulties of law enforcement, of military, especially in tense situations. When they finally came to me and said, Eric, if you're king for a day, what do we do? And I said, it comes down to this. The most stress, the most danger, the most harm we do when we communicate and build trust or destroy that trust are on scenes, on raids, on target when we're doing these interrogations and the soldiers don't have an interrogator. During the capture of Saddam, I went on 30 raids. But the military went on hundreds, even thousands of raids during that same 6 months. And I said, we have to learn to communicate during the most stressful times, when that tension is so high, when every camera is on. And over the next 10 years, I created the on-target interrogation technique. And I know on-target interrogation in the battlefield is different than communication in a stressful environment here in the United States. But the fundamentals, the principles are still the same. It's about defusing a situation, understanding how do we communicate, not that we can't do our job, not that we aren't ready and prepared to even put our lives in danger. That is the sacrifice every single time you leave the house. You know it may be the last time you see your family. And you may have to use deadly force in the course of your job. But the key is that we realize the gain in trust comes when the stress and the tension is most on the line. That is where the world will be watching you. That is where the locals, that is where that communication comes. Right now, there are people are forming or have formed their opinions on both sides. But it's no secret, it's not even a political statement to say right now, relationships between law enforcement and the populace, they're tense. They're tense. And we can't change the way it is right now at this moment. But what we have to do is strategically look and go, how do we communicate? What is it that builds trust? What is it during these most tense times, during the most dangerous standoffs? I've had the opportunity to give my presentation and my training to the Baltimore Hostage Negotiation Conference, the California Hostage Negotiation Conference, the two largest hostage negotiation conferences in the United States. And it's about dealing with those most tense times and not saying, I have to gain control. I have got to gain the upper hand. I've got to force communications. I've got to fulfill the agenda. But literally having the confidence to give up the control, to listen. Every single thing I need to know about the other side, their situation, winning trust of the locals, knowing how to gain trust of somebody who has a negative perception of me. I rely on them to tell me what they need. I do not have an agenda. People always ask me, Eric, what are some of the great questions that we can start off with? And I say, you do not have a single question inside of your mind. That's your agenda. You're a counterpuncher. Whatever comes out of their mouth, that will tell you what to do. Muhammad Ibrahim told me, you give me too much credit. I don't know where that guy is. Credit. He had zero credibility. He believed that he could get his way out of it because he was not on the deck of cards. But what I knew was he was elevated. Saddam could care less about the old deck of cards. That old deck of cards was useless to him. Muhammad Ibrahim was the new deck of cards. And he knew it. I just had to let him know the ramifications of what it meant to be the new, ace of hearts or whatever. He was the number 2 guy. And all these 40 family members. And not to say, I'm going to show you. I told him, and I followed up on him, all 40 of those male family members who were involved in the insurgency, every single one of them got released after the capture of Saddam Hussein. What does that mean? I forgave him. It doesn't matter what I think. It's about gaining trust. I have to take emotions. I've got to take irritations, agenda, feelings out of these communications, because the larger goal is that we need to gain trust with every single person in our world. Why? Why does that matter? In law enforcement, the most important thing that we need is control. But the old control that says we're going to tell people what to do. We're going to have limits. They will listen to us. And that is not just in law enforcement. That's in many, many different industries across the world. But the changes in communication, capabilities, smartphones, devices that have an openness. It basically is the world. Listen, the world has said, you will no longer control us. I'm telling you, the greatest control that you can have over someone is to win their trust. Why? Because when you win your trust by listening to them at those high levels, you become an anomaly. You are a differentiator. The world will seek you. They will be drawn towards you, and you will maximize your influence. Do you know how much the world loves right now the stories? We've seen them on Facebook and social media, right? When there's something about the fantastic relationship or communication between a law enforcement officer and somebody who would deem to be currently in a state where they wouldn't support law enforcement, right? That's the greatest thing ever. Look at this, and things are great. And I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying, do you understand the impact that that level of trust is achieving for you? Do you understand the influence that you're gaining? Building that level of trust through this level of communication will make you the most powerful you can be. The world is pushing against forced control, against these regulations. This is the way we've always done it. I was told, Eric, here's the way we do interrogations. When I went and taught, here's how I found Saddam, they said, that's not the way we do things around here. And it was the hardest message. I really didn't even understand to deliver it. And the message is this. I'm not saying back then it wasn't useful. I'm not saying right now I need you to just trust what I tell you is correct. But I need you to look at, why did we have to change? What forced those changes? Because it's the world, technology, the way the mindset of people on this globe. When those change, you've got to change tactics. And the tactic that I'm telling you is now. I want you to maximize your influence. I want you to gain the trust of every single person that comes in your world. But you've got to give up the control to gain the influence. You have to. You've got to go across. Be that differentiator. Be that one that listens. Be that one that goes, you're different. You're different than the rest of the world. I want to be around you. I want to partner with you. I want to give you my influence. All right. I love asking questions. I do it by the gazillions, but I also like fielding questions. So at this time, I'm want to come on and I want to answer any questions that you all have for me at this time. Let's go.